The presidency has denied what it calls the purported 114% increase in the salaries of the president, vice president, elected federal and state political office holders, and judicial officers. A statement issued this Thursday by spokesman for President Tinubu, Dele Alake, reads in part, and I quote, "We state without equivocation that while we recognize that it is within the constitutional remit of Revenue, Mobilisation, Allocation and Fiscal Commission to propose and fix salaries and allowances of political office holders and judicial officers, such cannot come into effect until it has equally been considered and approved by the President." Dr. Andrew Neven is partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria and is here with us to discuss this exponential upward review, its desirability or otherwise in view of the current state of the country's economy. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Neven, for joining us on Newsday.
It's great to be here with you.
Now, first of all, your thoughts on the proposal by the Revenue, Mobilisation, Allocation and Fiscal Commission to increase, some political office holders to increase their salary by 114%.
Well, I think it may be an apocryphal story, but in around 300 AD, when Alexander the Great had his empire, the story was told that he was in the desert and one of his men brought him a glass of water. All the men were thirsty, and he poured the water into the desert, and he said, "I don't drink until everyone drinks." And I think there's an important principle that says, people at the bottom of the pyramid need to be taken care of first here. So this announcement by the Revenue, Mobilisation, Allocation and Fiscal Committee, which is quite a mouthful, I think would strike Nigerians as being the wrong way around. I mean, we have a situation where in many states the state employees are not being paid, pensions are not being paid, people have not got an increase despite rapid inflation, and of course we're discussing increases for civil servants both at the federal and the state level. So to have the RMAFC come out with this recommendation at this point in time, I think would strike Nigerians as not the right thing to do until we figure out a comprehensive way to take care of everyone that's involved in the government system.
And then, of course, the statement from the presidency. Some people are having issues on exactly how to interpret it. Are they saying that it will not be approved, or are they saying that it has been considered and will be approved? What's your take on the statement released, by the presidency?
Well, I don't want to speculate on what the presidency will or will not do, but I mean, I think we've been shown that the new administration, is very intelligent. It knows the right things to do to fix the economy. It recognizes that the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid or at the minimum wage or around the minimum wage or up to maybe 100, 200,000 naira a month in terms of the civil service need to be taken care of. So I would be quite surprised. And of course, I think they also recognize that Nigerians are really asking for the federal government to show value for money, because I mean, there's so much wastage that we've seen over the years, whether it's things like Ajakuta Steel or the 3 refineries that gulp billions of dollars and there's no refined product, there's no steel. The new international airport terminal in Lagos, which is $500 million, are not used. So again, a tremendous waste of resources. So I think that the new administration is very aware it needs to show value for money. So I'd be quite surprised if it put this RMAFC recommendation forward at this time and gave its assent before taking care of it in a holistic way. And of course, it's also tied into the removal of the foil subsidy. I mean, there's discussions with the NLC about raising the minimum wage. The NLC has put out the number 150,000 naira. I think everyone would be surprised at that. But I mean, the private sector has been raising people's wages because it recognizes there's been significant inflation. And of course, the private sector has raised prices in many cases. So it's reported in the press, for example, that GT Bank doubled the salaries of its lower level workers on that. So I expect that the government will sequence it so that they address the workers in the federal civil service at the beginning and the minimum wage level. Perhaps some of the states can follow before they end up raising the salaries and the entitlements of the higher paid people like the judges, like the political class. And I think that there's such an emphasis now on the cost of governance in this nation. I don't think that people are going to view very positively if there's big increases for the political class at this point in time.
Well, we've had the AFC, attempt to justify this proposal. The federal commissioner of the RMAFC, Mr. Hassan Usman, who appeared, on our station earlier, believes that the increase is overdue, as the last time the affected public officials' salaries were increased was 16 years ago. He also says that these elected officials, as well as the entire populace, are all confronted with the same economic situation. So I'm wondering, how logical this explanation is, or how sensitive it is, considering the hardship Nigerians are currently facing.
Well, I think that one of the things that this incident is going to do is cause the presidency. I don't want to make predictions, but I think it'll cause the presidency to rethink the role of different agencies. I mean, they've already come out and said FIRS, Customs, and NMASA should be merged. It should strike people as a bit strange. There's a separate agency called the Revenue Mobilisation, Allocation, and Fiscal Committee that's deciding on the salaries for the civil servants, the salaries for political class, the salaries for judges. You would think that that function actually should be kind of rolled up more into the core government on that. So I wouldn't be surprised if it caused some rethink of the structure of these agencies. I mean, the presidency's already come out and say it's going to implement the Orange Shea report. It is quite dysfunctional having this separate revenue mobilization group and deciding on the salaries for senior civil servants. It should be a core function of the government. So maybe this will be the trigger for them to pull the trigger on that kind of restructuring. So maybe we'll see the RMAFC eliminated fairly soon on that, or its functions rolled into other agencies, because I mean it is something that creates we created another agency that's probably not necessary, whose core function should be really within the department of one of the ministries on that. But because it's an agency with separate powers that are put forward by law, it's creating real problems in making the right decisions at this time.
Now, I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here. On the other hand, I've heard some analysts, argue that although the 114% increment seems huge, that it's, actually not significant considering the devaluation of the naira. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, that's probably absolutely right, and I think this group of people haven't had a pay rise for a while. But, I mean, if you think about it from just people looking at it who haven't been paid, if their salaries haven't been paid, and it's not necessarily the federal government employees, but many state employees have not been paid, or you look at federal government employees on minimum wage, they've also been subject to inflation. Inflation for people at the bottom of the pyramid are earning 30,000, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 naira a month has been worse because food inflation has been worse. So we may be justified in increasing the judges' salaries, but it would not be, I think, fundamentally fair, and I don't think it would be a good political move on the government to choose to increase these people's salaries first, who are already high earners in our society. I think they've really got to start with the viewpoint they need to do the right thing in the totality for the nation, and of course that's what the president has promised all along. That's what he promised in his inauguration speech. So I mean, obviously we can't predict the future. The presidency's already come out and say it's not bound by this decision, but maybe it will assent to it. But I think that would be an error in the sequencing. As I said, I mean, I think the government needs to show it took away the foil subsidy. Of course, that was a highly corrupt system, as we know, and a lot of the subsidized foil flowing through to other countries. So it was the right move. But the government has promised that it would also design other systems, including an increase in the minimum wage, in order to compensate groups that have lost a little bit from taking away the foil subsidy. So to start out by having this 114% increase for the high wage earners, put ahead of the increase in wage earners for those earning less in the government system, I think would be a huge mistake. And I would actually, frankly, be surprised. I mean, everything from this government has shown that they understand that they're here to govern for all the people. I mean, the problem we've had, certainly over the 15 years that I've been here, is the government's effectively really done nothing for the people. I mean, it's been designed as a system to compensate the people who are within it, either through large salaries in some cases, or of course outright corruption in other cases. So now the government's promised that the government's going to serve the people, and so they need to make the decisions that show that. And I think putting the decision to raise this group of people salaries and emoluments by 114% would be a mistake if that's what they were trying to signal to the public.
Now, while negotiations are going on how to increase, on how many percent the minimum wage should be increased, some people also say that government should be considering practical steps, to cut the cost of governance, what would you suggest? Dr. Neven?
Well, I think with the cost of governance, sorry, I've just lost you for a moment, but I mean, on the cost of governance,
about practical steps that you can suggest, on how government can actually cut the cost of governance.
Right. So on the cost of governance, I mean, I think all Nigerians understand it's being too high and they haven't got value for money. I think the starting point, again, is the Orange Shea report. I mean, it came out in 2013. I'm sure it needs to be refreshed. But this system where we have over 1,000 MDAs, of course, is not fit for purpose. I mean, it was designed essentially as a system of political patronage, create many board positions. I mean, those following the news know that for many of the MDAs, the board is being dissolved. I mean, the non-executive members, it's over 3,000 people who are there, who all receive compensation and per diems and expenses for being part of these boards. And of course, in many cases, some of these MDAs or some of these agencies in particular are not serving any positive function for the nation. And they also create real complexity in the private sector, because when you have multiple regulators, they each impose separate taxes, they have overlapping jurisdictions, they're giving confusing signals. So I think it's really a critical step. And the government has said, the presidency has said it's going to do it, is implement some form of the Orange Shea report. We're going to arrive at a reduced number of MDAs, particularly a reduced number of agencies. Some I hope will be just shut outright. I don't want to name any on air, but there's certainly many of them that are not serving any useful purpose for the effort that's expended. Some of the functions need to be rolled back into the core ministry, where it's the minister and the presidency that can decide directly, rather than having an agency that has a little bit more independence on that. So I think that's the starting point on that, and I think Nigerians expect that. They want to see a significant reduction in the cost of governance, but it's only going to happen if you actually reduce the number of MDAs that are involved on that, because that's the largest source of it. Of course, people are also interested in the individual salary levels of NAS members and of ministers, and that should be taken a look at. But in terms of the total spending and the complexity it imposes on the economy and private sector actors, it's really the multiplicity of MDAs that's the core problem for the nation.
Now, on the issue of fuel subsidy removal, we've already seen labor unions negotiating with the federal government on how to cushion the impact of the fuel subsidy removal. Now, one of their demands, as you said earlier, is to increase the minimum wage, with the TUC suggesting 200,000 naira. How practical is this? Is this a step in the right direction? What else would you suggest that the government can do to help cushion the effect of this removal?
Well, I mean, I think like most commentators, 200,000 isn't a realistic level. I think it's fair that we have an increase in minimum wage. I mean, let's be honest, a minimum wage of 30,000 naira at the parallel market of 750 naira to the dollar, I mean, is what, $40 a month. So that's not a real salary. No family can survive on that in any part of the country. So I expect the minimum wage to be increased. If I had to put a number, I suspect it'll be $50,000 to $80,000 naira a month on that. The 200,000 naira is not realistic. But as a starting point, I mean, I think one of the things coming out of the fuel subsidy. Remember, as I said a little earlier, we have pensioners and state employees in many states not being paid. And of course, one of the major reasons they're not being paid for, in many cases, a long time, up to a year or longer, is because there's been no payment from the NMPC to the Federation account. And there's been no payment from the Federation account because of the foil subsidy. So with the removal of the foil subsidy, hopefully now we'll start to see a flow of funds to the governors. I heard a number that it should be about 7 billion naira a month to the average state, and they can start to pay their salaries. So the first palliative, if you want to call it, is let's pay the people who have not been paid, who are supposed to be paid, particularly starting with the pensioners on that. That would be the first step. So, I mean, if we had those payments made and we had an increase in minimum wage, I think that would go a long way. What I'm not sure about is special programs to support the bottom of the pyramid. If we have in place mechanisms to make sure that we know who the people are that should be getting this money, and we have mechanisms to make sure there's no diversion, then that could be useful. But to try to build that program right now in a matter of weeks, I think is impossible. And the danger, if we take, for example, the $800 million palliative fund that the federal government has agreed with the World Bank, $800 million. I mean, it's only about $6 per person in multidimensional poverty, so it's a very small amount of money. And of course, the risk is, unless there's already a system in place to distribute that money, all that's going to happen is what we've seen happen with so many other programs, where there's diversion and it doesn't really get to the people that deserve it. Instead, it ends up in other private pockets, and particularly large amounts diverted off to be of no use to Nigeria.
Still on the issue of palliatives, we've seen some state governors reducing the number of days workers have to physically come into work. Instead, they're expected to work remotely. But given Nigeria's lapses in terms of technology, some economists say this move could be counterproductive. I'd like to know your own opinion on this.
Well, I mean, there's no easy solution to this, right? I mean, we need to pay a world price for foil. I mean, the foil subsidy, was clearly bankrupting the nation on it. I mean, I think that in many cases, in fact, people are kind of adjusting to the new foil price, and there's less trips. And certainly I'm here in Lagos today, and the traffic is much reduced. And people are telling me people are adjusting and they're carpooling more. So I take the point that going to a 3-day work week is not 3 days that you come to the office, 2 days you stay at home, may not be ideal. But we had a similar situation in COVID, and states and the federal government adjusted to it, and the private sector. But I think what it highlights to say, what's the core problem here? I mean, many times in Nigeria, we have an issue, and instead of addressing the issue, we address a symptom of the issue. I mean, the core problem here is we need better telecommunications network, and we need it for many reasons. I mean, one, we want to implement e-government, so we need to have a better telecommunications network. We want our young people to be involved in ICT. We want young people to be able to work remotely for global companies, whether they're in Kano or Calabar or Warri or any other place, Ibadan, any other place in the country. So I think that one lesson the government should take away from this, both the state and the federal government, state level and federal government, is what are we going to do about the telecommunications sector? I mean, right now the telecommunications sector, I think, has about 40 separate taxes, levies, and fees. It's really straining under those on that and the complexity of that. We actually need a much better telecommunications network, and we need much better connectivity. We need 5G if we want to be able to do these things. If we had a better telecommunications network, then it may make sense for a state to say, actually stay home 2 days a week. It saves all the time and effort of getting here. It saves you the foil cost. You can do some of your work remotely on those days on that. So there's no easy fix on that, but I'd really like to see this government, rather than try to put a Band-Aid solution on an issue like this, really focus on the fundamentals. And of course, Nigerians have suffered so much. I mean, I think they will be welcoming if they think the government's working fundamentally on the right issues and doing it in a way that's fair to all Nigerians.
Now, Dr. Neven, I'd like you to speak to us about the CBN's effort, to unify the exchange rate. What impact is it likely to have on businesses, students studying abroad, the economy in general?
Well, again, I mean, we have been advocates of a unified exchange rate for quite some time. We've been very public about it for a few reasons. One, it's just impossible to run your business. Any private sector operation just says we don't know. We don't know when we have access to foreign exchange. We have to put up the Naira. The letter of credit's open for a year. The Naira is tied up. It's just impossible to run it. And they've been very clear. We just would like some certainty. We can go to, there's a market price at any point in time. Obviously, it's going to move around, but at least we can go to the bank and say, this is the price today, and conduct our foreign exchange. But, on the issue of people who are receiving dollars at 4.11 for their children to go to school abroad, think about the redistributive properties of this. As I said before, the pensioner in Sokoto is not getting paid. Well, why is that pensioner not getting paid? Well, what's happened is there's money from the Federation account. It's transferred from NNPC to the Federation account. It's dollars. I mean, the NNPC earns its revenue in dollars. Oil is sold in dollars. But rather than give Sokoto those dollars, the CBN then gives those dollars at 4.11 to the parent who has someone in the UK schooling system. Now, that parent, by Nigerian standards, is obviously, in the wealthy part of society. So the pensioner in Sokoto, because the dollars were sold at 4.11 instead of 7.50, is not getting paid. So what's the justice of that? And I think governors are starting to realize that the system that we had before I'm not going to call it a fixed exchange rate, it was just a privileged access of some people to exchange rate at 4.11 and other people having to pay 7.50. And if you weren't part of that privileged group that had access at 4.11, then you were suffering on it. So, overall it's going to help. And of course, businesses already, I can tell you, I was with one businessman this morning, a very prominent person in Nigeria, and he was very clear. We are very happy that there's a unified exchange rate. It presents challenges in our business. Prices are going to go up, but at least we have some certainty how to deal with it. But we've also had lots of signals from foreign investors. They're now willing to consider really ready to reconsider Nigeria. What we said in 2017 or 2016 was, as long as there were multiple exchange rates, as long as there was confusion about whether you had access to dollars, who had access to dollars, people would not invest from outside. And that came true. And the result of that was we got poorer and poorer and poorer. We had a massive increase in the number of poverty. So again, I really applaud the new administration because they're fixing the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue was that any kind of fixed exchange rate, or not fixed exchange rate, system where scarce dollars were given to certain actors at a lower price just encouraged corruption, encouraged round tripping. It made you want to be part of that elite group. Businesses were spending a huge amount of time trying to be the ones getting dollars at 4.11, and very happy if they did it, rather than focus on the fundamentals of their business and building up employment and wealth for Nigerians. So we're very pleased with it. All indications are that it's going to work well. It's going to settle out quickly. I mean, we may see it settling at 750. Other commentators have said actually it's going to come in at a 600. I think the government has come out and said, look, they would like to see the Naira settle at 550 to 600. Yes, go ahead.
So, I mean, from your reply, it's very clear that you believe the steps taken by the president so far is boosting confidence in foreign investors. But I'm wondering what else can be done, to boost foreign direct investment in Nigeria? Very briefly, please.
Well, I think it's not all up to the federal government. I think there's a big role for state governments to showcase the projects they have. And I think some state governments were doing a good job prior to the new administration. I think it'll now be easier because the new administration is doing things to encourage FDI. And I think state governors need to go out and sell their states. I mean, development isn't going to happen at a national level. It's going to happen at an individual state level. People invest in projects in an individual state. Governor Obaseki, who I often cite, has done a very good job on a number of sectors, ICT, palm oil, for example. And each governor has to get out and be able to sell those projects, but they need to be able to sell it in an environment overall for the nation that's going to make investors comfortable in coming here. But the governors are doing that. And if we have 36 governors and FCT, the minister for FCT, all out selling their states and the FCT, the economy is going to do very, very well.
Partner and Chief Economist at PwC Nigeria, Dr. Andrew Neven, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.